find in the report that is going along with that. Can you share with us the role of banks and other financial institutions in the climate crisis? Obviously, it sounds a bit, two different worlds coming together. So can we get into the role of banks and financial institutions in the climate crisis?
Okay, thank you so much for that question. So to start with, when it comes to the issues of climate change mitigation and adaptation, we do require resources. We can have all the policies lined up, but do we have the resources? Do we have the finances? So the banks actually act as conduits for these financial resources. So being a conduit of these resources, the money can be channeled either towards actual solutions to climate change, or they can actually be used to perpetuate the crisis by continuously supporting the contributors of the climate crisis. So we're talking about fossil fuels, continuous funding towards fossil fuels, as well as industrial agriculture, where we're talking about the excessive use of pesticides, fertilizers that are actually contributing to the emissions of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere.
So basically, you're telling us, the role that banks are playing when it comes to the climate crisis is they are the funders for most of these projects that are creating solutions in that regard, yes?
Yes, that's exactly the point.
Now, can we also talk about some of the positives and negatives of banks and financial institutions influencing climate crisis?
Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, when it comes to the negatives, these banks can maybe intentionally or unintentionally fund projects that are actually perpetuating more, contributing more to the emission of greenhouse gases. So earlier I mentioned about fossil fuels. So maybe these banks can be used to, fund resources towards expansion of fossil industries and also industrial agriculture. And of course, when we're talking about industrial agriculture, it takes up more space, needs more inputs, chemicals and all that. So with the expansion of such industries, that would mean more contributions to greenhouse gas emissions. I'm talking about, for example, methane, which is more lethal than the carbon dioxide, and this is emanating from industrial agriculture. The rearing of livestock and also the usage of fertilizers. On the other hand, the banks also have the potential to fund actual solutions such as utilization of agroecological practices to, boost the soil fertility and also the productivity of the land, making sure that the farmers are able to harvest more crops, working with nature instead of against it.
Okay. Yeah. Now, obviously, like we are talking about this campaign that you launched, which is Fund Our Future, right? Obviously, regarding finance and how it actually affects the climate crisis, which you've already broken down for us. Now, let's get into the report that you also, which is going obviously hand in hand with this particular campaign. So what are some of the things that stood out for you when you did, your survey and all of that? What are some of the things that stood out for you in the report?
Okay, so what really stood out for me really is the amount of money that is being channeled to more towards the climate crisis, propelling or maybe worsening the climate crisis rather than actually solving it. So, for example, we're talking about the amount of money that the world's 60 biggest banks have channeled towards fossil fuels and industrial agriculture. We are talking about a total of $5.5 trillion that was channeled by the world's biggest banks. The report actually mentions the names of these banks. And this amount has been channeled since the Paris Agreement was signed. That was like 7 years ago. So we are still seeing an increase of resources being channeled towards things that are worsening or exacerbating the climate crisis. And also, when we are talking about industrial agriculture, again, the figures there showed that $370 billion has been channeled towards industrial agriculture in the global south. So when you look at these monies, that's actually more than 20 times of more financing to fossil fuels and industrial agriculture than to actually what is being channeled towards climate change adaptation and mitigation efforts. In comparison to what the finances are in terms of climate change adaptation and mitigation, we're talking about just $22.25 billion that is being channeled to the global south in terms of resources for climate change adaptation and mitigation. So clearly there we are seeing misdirection of resources. And it's also important to note that even though these banks are international, actually, we may say, okay, these do not apply to our local setting. But I think looking at such figures and statistics, it's also important for us to do a self introspection as a country when it comes to the banks that we have here. What are their priorities when it comes to climate change efforts? Are they really worsening, or are they trying to, contribute towards the protection of the environment and also the climate? Then also interestingly, when we look at the agriculture sector, being the second largest contributor of greenhouse gases globally, when we talk about the sectors that are actually contributing, we're talking about agriculture, which is standing at 34%, agriculture, forestry, and other land use. Then we're also talking about transport, which is at 16, energy, 15. So when you look at these percentages, we are seeing that definitely agriculture is one of the biggest culprits when it comes to the emission of greenhouse gases.
Okay. Now, out of curiosity, you've talked about how these banks are obviously putting more funding towards things that are actually deteriorating the environment. Do you think they are actually well informed on the things that they're doing? Are they, like you did mention earlier, some of these are doing it knowingly, some unknowingly. How do you engage them so that they're more aware that what they're doing, maybe they could shut down, turn down projects, but also it's a business. So how does that work exactly? How do you work with them while they're thinking we can make money off this if we're funding it, regardless of whether it's bad for the, or is it just their social responsibility to at least do something for the environment in return as well?
Okay, thank you for that question. So really, when we're talking about financial institutions, right, they are all about, making profit at the
Yeah.
end of it. So they'll make sure that even the sectors that they fund, they want to get a return out of that. But at the end of the day, it is at what expense? It's at the expense of the degradation of the environment. So maybe when we look at the sustainability, for the sake of sustainability, this is an opportunity for them to look at other innovative ways that will help them to explore other opportunities to ensure that there is investment in, for example, clean energy, which can, of course, it is profitable. And at the end of the day, it's also saving the environment. We're also talking about agroecology, which is also making sure that we are maximizing the land, but in a way that is sustainable in the long run. So I think looking at it from that angle, it is possible to find other innovative ways of making more money.
Okay. All right. So if you're just joining us, this is the ActionAid radio program, where today we're talking about the ActionAid's Fund for Our Future Climate Justice campaign. So on Tuesday, the 26th of September 2023, ActionAid Zambia launched its climate justice campaign called Fund Our Future. This was also coupled with a report, which is how the finance flows, the banks fueling the climate crisis. The report highlights, of course, the main sectors contributing to the climate crisis, especially in the global south, propelled by resources from financial institutions. And like I did say earlier today in studio, I am joined by Rabecca Mwambazi, who's from ActionAid. And also, we've been joined by Michael Mwansa. Welcome to the program. Good morning. How are you?
Thank you. Welcome to the listeners.
Do tell us, what do you do at ActionAid? We did learn about what Rabecca does there. What do you do at ActionAid?
So at ActionAid, the climate justice and humanitarian lead based at the Globe platform within ActionAid Zambia. It's a youth wing for ActionAid, where we do programming that relates to climate justice, humanitarian, but also democratic and civic participation of young people in governance spaces. So basically, it's a youth hub that allows young people to come and ideate, bring in innovation, and be able to find solutions that affect socio-economic as well as cultural issues that are to our of importance of today for us.
All right.
Thank you.
So I will throw this one to you because you've just joined us, Michael. We have, of course, established some of the findings of the report itself. Are there any things that stood out for you as an individual when you were carrying out, gathering all this information and putting everything together? Was there anything that stood out for you in this report in regards to banking and its effects on the climate as well?
Thank you very much. I think one of the things that we should be aware of, first of all, as a country is that we are alive to the fact that climate change is affecting our rural communities. And I'll give an example of our rural communities that are based in, for example, Nalolo, Gwembe. And recently, I think earlier on in June, Gwembe was declared as one of the most risky districts with the impacts of climate change. We've seen some of these impacts being seen, but also being experienced by our women and young people. But I think relating to our report, it's amazing that when the world is really grappling with some of these issues, and those that have the capacity to do something are actually channeling these resources to something else, which are contributing to the crisis. And it's amazing when you look at our report, because it just shows you the levels of seriousness also, but also questions some of the innovations and solutions that are being turned down to global South countries, and especially African countries. Just to make mention, Africa only contributes less than 4% of greenhouse emissions, globally. But when you look at other countries that are well industrialized, they contribute quite a lot. But we are the ones that are facing the brunt of the climate impacts. You've seen floods, you've seen droughts, you've seen pest infestations. And it's amazing that when these banks who have the mandate to give, financing solutions to some of these companies are actually encouraging, when their policies actually speak that they are funding renewable and transitional initiatives that are supporting environmental sustainability. So it was quite amazing to see the amounts, like, for example, the Paris Agreement that was established in 2015, 3.2 trillion US dollars has been financed in fossil fuels. And you look at that, and only about 22.25 billion has gone to environmental sustainability or climate financing. Now, when you look at that gap, it tells you something, that there is need for serious climate financing, but also this financing that we receive, most of it is in form of loans. So we have to still pay back. So in other words, the investment that comes to African countries do not really help, but actually exacerbates the impacts. Because when you have a flood, first of all, you have to deal with the impacts. For you have also to pay back the loan. So you have double crisis, debt and financing. So really, that is amazing about the report.
Okay. Now, talking about the implications of the current investment financing flows for a citizen of the global South, can we talk about that, the impact that investment in fossil fuels and industrial agriculture are having on the communities? Because you've talked about how, people would rather put money, the banks, of course, who we are focusing on today, how they would rather put money in these other business ventures that actually have negative effects on the environment. But how does this come down to the communities?
Well, first of all, I think for the community, especially from the global South and African countries, and to be precise, a Zambian resident, I think for us, it's about the issue of how do we ensure food security at our household? How do we support families? Okay. How do we support the health sector? How do we support the agriculture sector? How do we ensure there is social protection amongst our citizens? Now, all these come not only as a result of our interventions, but there is a hand that is being responsible for this, and that is the global North, because they're mandated to offer financial support to the global South. Now, if this financing continues, the implications are that, one, we continue to see, first of all, vulnerability among women and children. We continue to see high poverty levels, okay? We continue to see, first of all, a deterioration in terms of biodiversity. We continue to see environmental protection being violations in terms of investment in extractives. And you've seen, for example, because the government has to source for funds. And one of the things is that you'll find that most of these financiers we invest in extractives, like the mining, which is also has a threat to the environment. So what that entails is that for an ordinary Zambian, it's a serious problem for us, because then we have to deal with, first of all, our poverty issues, but also at the same time, the well-being of our communities. And this is a very serious problem, because what we need as African countries, as Zambia to be precise, is how then do we adapt to the impact of climate change? We need funds for adaptation. We need funds for resilience. We need funds to ensure that our communities are well taken care of in terms of livelihood. But how do we support if all the funds are going to fossil fuels? Agribusinesses were investing in, for example, synthetic fertilizers that are affecting even our agriculture sector. Remember, 70% of our agriculture sector is being being done by our rural communities. Okay. Now, if the soil that is supposed to be protected that is supposed to give yield and huge production in terms of agriculture output is always being funded through synthetic fertilizers. And when the government does not have the capacity to fund that, what happens is we see raw yield, isn't it? And therefore it threatens what? Food security at the end. So those are the implications for rural Zambia. Those are the implications for the African community.
Rabecca, would you like to add something to that? I know you were big on, how banks are definitely adding their finances to fossil fuels and investments such as that. When it comes to agriculture, especially Michael did mention, this is a country that obviously relies on our agriculture. So what are some of the major effects? And maybe if there's a bank out there that's listening and thinking, really, what are the effects that financing fossil fuels and industrial agriculture on the communities, especially when we talk about the agriculture sector itself?
So when we're talking about industrial agriculture, obviously we are talking about, land. So in order to ensure that they have more yield and all, they will need to expand their operations. So that will result in land grabs for the community members who are actually depending on the same pieces of land that they have in order to produce their goods and maybe provide for their families and also sell. But also in addition to that, we are talking about the pollution of these same lands that these natural that these communities have, which is also resulting in more violation of human rights. I mean, environmental rights have been recognized as a human right. So we're talking about the rights to having a land free from pollution, water free from pollution, air that is also free from pollution. So if the land is polluted or degraded, then definitely we are depriving of our community members their rights to have access to these goods that we are talking about and also the services. Also, when we look at these big corporations, when it comes to land reclamation, we have had cases here where we're saying after they have done their operations and also when they leave, the impacts they're leaving behind. I'll make mention of our famous Kawe incidents. Until now, people there are still facing the consequences of the mining that was taking place there, because the corporations that were responsible for the activities there failed to do what they were supposed to do. So left unchecked, these industries would definitely also leave a bad consequences for the communities out there with nothing to depend on because of the pollution.
Now, obviously, you are talking about banks having a different approach and how they're carrying out their work. We did talk about, they want to make their money. Now, what should the priorities for investment financing be in the face of climate crisis?
I think one of the things that we did look at is that most of these banks have committed to net zero policies. But one of the things that we've also observed is that in their policies, there is no clear guideline that really support sustainable agriculture. There are no clear guidelines that actually support, for example, agroecology. There are no clear guidance that actually support financing for small order farmers, supporting them with grants that would actually abate their poverty levels. Now, one of the things that is very, very important and key to note is that banks actually are a biggest institutions when it comes to climate financing. And therefore, they are key to unlock the solutions to the climate crisis today. Now, if these banks in their policies, but also in their guidelines and procedures, there is no clear guideline that speaks to the need for them to shift, their investment portfolio to sustainable means, clean energy, sustainable agriculture. What that entails is that the world will be on high demand for food, but again, the world will be on high demand for energy. And if we can't access all these things, we'll deplete the environment and therefore increasing the impacts of climate change. So it becomes very, very paramount that the banks, first of all, who are earmarked within our report, according to our survey, is that they take keen interest, first of all, to relook into their guidelines and policies and be able to say what we are saying we do, we are actually doing. When we say we are supporting environmental sustainability, we've seen even in Zambia, some of the banks that have been saying we're supporting the green transition, we're supporting green bonds, we're supporting the just transition, we're supporting clean energy projects. But the question is, when we look at the financial flows within their system,
which in turn are causing harm to the soils. I mean, our soils are no longer the same. We cannot compare them now to the way they were maybe 20, 50 years ago. But right now, because of the usage of these chemicals in order to enhance the yield, we are seeing damage to these soils. We're also talking about biodiversity and also climate. But when you look at agroecological farming approaches, these work with nature. You're looking at actually working with nature itself, and rather than not working against it. So we're talking about reliance on obviously our indigenous knowledge, which we seem to have, cast aside and trying to adopt things that may not apply to our context. So the usage of the usage of indigenous knowledge that we have, seed sovereignty, for example, we have and so forth. So really, if we work in harmony with nature in ensuring that we increase our yields, then that is really something that we can obviously look into. And we're not talking about, phasing this industrialized agriculture right there and then, but there should be a proper roadmap on how best they can do the actual phase out, making sure that there is a just transition. Mm-hmm. Also talking about clean energy. Our continent we have plenty of solar, sun. So why not harness that and utilize it to produce power via solar energy? We know obviously we have hydroelectric, but because of the climate change that we're experiencing, we are seeing changes in our rainfall. So how best can we also look into potential areas of generating power that is in a way sustainable? And when we look at this, this will definitely be beneficial for the communities and also the women that are mainly affected by these industries that we have mentioned. Then when it comes to recommendations, I think there is need for more transparency and as well as tools for verification. There is need for these banks to, enhance their transparency and accountability measures for existing and proposed projects that they have, as well as corporate public financing. So this should obviously come, having policies that are effective and also ensuring that they do check how the progress is in terms of implementation. Are we doing what we're supposed to do? How best can we improve to ensure that we are transparent enough in investing in projects that are actually sustainable for our environment in the long term?
Okay. All right, so we are talking the Fund Our Future climate justice campaign that's being carried out by ActionAid Zambia. It was launched on Tuesday, the 26th of September 2023, and this also was coupled with the report on how the finance flows, the banks fueling climate crisis, which is all that we're talking about this morning. So this report basically highlights the main sectors contributing to the climate crisis, especially in the global south, propelled by resources from financial institutions. And in studio today to discuss this, we're joined by Michael Mwansa and Rabecca Mwambazi, who have come from ActionAid to tell us more about this campaign and what they hope to achieve. And we've been talking banking versus climate loans financing in the country. I know obviously there's a lot of young people that are rising to this, and you will correct me because obviously the report has better statistics than I do. But how do you think you expect activists and youths to work hand in hand in making sure that they're doing the proper influence in terms of priorities that banks have in terms of financing in Zambia?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think from time immemorial, activists have played a key role in transforming our country and also global community. Activists have played a key role in socio-economic development, in governance. And this is very, very important even for the climate crisis. We have seen that many young people have come on board, many allies who work and those who support and protect environmental rights have come on board to support. And this is because they are experiencing the climate impacts. They are actually at the center of the brunt of the climate crisis. And therefore, we are saying that this call to action is for everyone because this is. And therefore, we are saying that this call to action is for everyone because if we don't do anything, that is also a decision. that you've taken. But we are saying that we need to act now in order for us to demand for climate justice. And that's why young people, it's a very great opportunity for them to come forth and be able to engage these institutions, including government, and also through CDF. How can we ensure that through CDF we have projects that are environmentally sustainable, that speak to the current crisis within our context, that are responsible to the communities, the local communities? How can we ensure that those projects that are being developed in communities are not only fueling the climate crisis, but they are also supporting environmental sustainability and recovery? How are we ensuring that there is resilience, there is adaptation? So all those are key issues that would enhance accountability and transparency at community level for many young people, women, and other allies within the climate space to come on board and be able to support this campaign. This campaign is for everyone because we know that climate justice affects everyone, and especially for us in the global south, and to be precise, for all of us who are in Africa and Zambia in particular. So this campaign calls for all of us to take stock of what is being financed, first of all, to clean energy, what is being financed towards agroecology, what is being financed towards sustainable agriculture. So these become core issues that young people can come on board, be allies to ActionAid and also to the global community that are pushing the climate agenda in order for us indeed to demand for our loss and damage. Remember that this has been evidenced in some of the things that we've been going through. For example, the disruption through floods, the disruption through droughts, and most of the communities are highly impacted. So we are calling on everyone who is so much concerned, who knows, who has felt, who has experienced, to tell their stories so that we can amplify these voices at the global community. Remember, we are going towards a COP, the Conference of Parties, where we discuss some of these issues. And it is very, very important for Zambian communities, especially young people, women, children, and those that support the climate justice agenda, to bring up their voices in their own way. They can send a message, they can share, their concerns from wherever they are, and we can amplify these voices to the global community. So this is how they can be able to participate in the campaign.
And Rabecca, what do you think? I mean, what is the role of climate activists and youth, the youth innovators in influencing the investment financing? Are they even able to influence the investment financing of banks, and how young people can also influence the priorities that banks take up when it comes to these things? Obviously, if the banks are doing this, who is influencing them in the first place? But how do young people come on and ensure that banks are influenced in the right direction that you want them to take?
Okay, thank you so much. So I think in terms of influence, youths and climate activists actually play a very important role, especially in policy direction and in formulation. When we look at youths, they are readers, they are researchers. So when we look at that capability and what they have, they are also more innovative. So they may have ideas on how best they can contributes towards environmental sustainability and climate justice. So how best can these banks be able to help them or support them in terms of the initiatives that they have? And also when it comes to the CDF, also how best can this be utilized to ensure that more youths are actually being innovative and are able to implement their initiatives through the CDF? Could there be a deliberate way where maybe a particular amount of resources is directed towards initiatives or projects that are aligned to climate change, for example, climate smart agriculture, or maybe generation of clean energy? So I think having such platforms, or maybe giving them spaces for them to thrive and also present their ideas, can actually be beneficial for them and also the country.
Okay. Now, obviously, we're talking. Oh, you wanted to say something,
Yeah,
Richard?
yeah,
Please
exactly.
go ahead.
I think just in addition to what Rabecca has indicated, I think it's important for us to really take note. One of the things that young people have been talking about of late is that they have these ideas, they have these, great and brilliant, innovations, but they lack financing. And these banks have this great opportunity to fund some of these initiatives because they support environmental sustainability, they support adaptation, they support resilience, building within the communities. And therefore, it creates a great platform, where now financing institutions actually, when they're looking for young people, they look for these innovators, they look for these ideators who can actually bring a solution to a climate crisis. So it gives them that opportunity that not only ends in talking, because, mostly young people would be considered, they're always talking, they are just making noise, they have nothing to show for. But I think young people have demonstrated, since time immemorial, that they've got the capacity to contribute to the leadership development in terms of socio-economic, including climate, developments, to ensure that they are part and parcel of this solution. And that's what we are saying, that financial institutions have this great opportunity. Let their financing also be deliberate and intentional in targeting young people who are actually creating these innovations that are addressing the climate crisis.
Now, while you're calling on banks and all of this is, for funding our future, which makes perfect sense, right? What are some of the things that have you sat down with banks to hear their side of the story? And I ask this because obviously we have government who have the power to also say, well, we're not going to allow for, you talked about fossil fuel investment story. And I ask this because obviously we have government who have the power to also say, well, we're not going to allow for, you talked about fossil fuel investments, for example, and yet they still do. So what do you think are some of the things that are missing to link everyone together so that funding actually goes to these things that government, I think government is also, you might know, is aware that we need more financing towards a greener Zambia, for example. So is it that government maybe is not doing enough to influence which obviously has a huge influence on everybody, whether it's citizens or organizations, to put financing to the right areas when it comes to creating a green environment?
I think one of the things is that I'll cite an example. We have the Industrial Development Bank. We have government institutions that actually receive investment. And first of all, we have the Ministry of Green Economy and Environment. Okay. And through our 8th National Development Plan, we have pillar number 3 that supports environmental sustainability. And we've seen also through the budget, there is environmental protection. Now, these are some of the measures that government is striving to ensure that we bring about environmental justice, but also environmental protection to our communities. Now, it is up to the government to look into what kind of investments come into this country and how are these investments supporting environmental sustainability. Because if we and the
Green Zambia, for example.
I think one of the most important thing is that the government is striving to do something, but I think we can do more.
Okay.
I think it is important for us to recognize that the climate crisis needs urgent attention right now. And in terms of priority, that speaks to adaptation. But also, you look at, for example, climate financing in Zambia, domestic finance. I'll speak about, for example, the carbon tax that we have in Zambia. We've not seen its direction. We've not, up until now, we've not heard about the update as to how much of that carbon tax has been going to environmental protection, actually. So those are some of the accountability and transparency mechanism that you're talking about. We're also saying that, look, in as much as we want to do environmental sustainability, when you look into the budget, always our environmental protection has received less than what is required. When you look at the Marawa Declaration on Agriculture, when you look at, for example, the Abuja Declaration on Environmental Sustainability, our environmental sustainability receives 0.6% of the national budget. Now, that is less. And when you look into the nitty-gritties of that budget allocation, you find that much of it goes to than to environmental strategies. And that's what we're saying, that we need standalone funding that is really addressing our climate crisis. We need standalone funding that we can point to. For example, how much has gone to agroecology? How much has gone to extension services? Because extension services and extension officers are responsible to deliver those extension services to the local communities. So if there is no funding that goes to them, there is no one who is able to deliver agroecology. There is no one who is able to deliver sustainable practices to these communities. And therefore, we create that gap. And what we are saying, that gap has to be sealed by ensuring that government becomes very deliberate and intentional on how funds are allocated to agroecology, how funds are allocated to environmental protection.
All right.
And
Well, makes perfect sense.
maybe just to add also, yes, in our earlier preamble, we are saying the global north, this, the global north, that in terms of finances. But I think in terms of resources towards environmental protection, we are also supposed to have something domestically rather than depending on mainly the global north to give us this climate financing. So how best can we do that? We have noticed, like in the national budgets there, the allocation is very low due to different factors. Maybe the environmental portfolio is still quite small, but how best can the government ensure that they create portfolios or they create other initiatives that will help them secure more funds towards environmental protection? We're talking about the environmental protection funds. There are different funds that were actually set up, but when we look at them now, are they really serving their purpose in terms of domestic resource mobilization? Zambia, in order to, for example, implement its nationally determined contributions, it needs a lot of money. It needs about 17 billion US dollars. And that 17 billion US dollars will not only come from outside, but we also need to play our part in ensuring that we prioritize domestic resource mobilization and increase the revenue for environmental protection as a country.
All right. Now, as we wrap up our conversation, obviously we've been talking the Fund the Future campaign. Now let's wrap it up with the global climate justice campaign that you guys are doing. And obviously we're funding the future. So the future, they say, is made of the youths. So how then do you get young people involved in this campaign, and how can they jump on and play a role in ensuring that this cause is actually reached?
Thank you very much. I think one of the things that we need to do is that we always say young people or imiti kula empanga, and we always think of young people in terms of the future. But I think it is high time that we thought of young people as leaders of today that have actually the skill and the capacity to contribute to the socio-economic development of this country. But to be precise, young people, for us today, we have a duty and a decision to make on how we are going to contribute to reduce carbon emissions, on how we are going to contribute to reduce the impacts of climate change. And therefore, it is up to us. What are we going to say to the future generations? Did you have an opportunity to do something? Are we going to say, no, we'll give, reasons, and every reason that has to be given there in order for us to get an excuse that we did not have an opportunity? And I think we have an opportunity. We've seen there's so many opportunities. And what we're talking about is climate financing. We're talking about these opportunities where young people actually can come on board and demand, because it is also part of their future process. It is part of their engagement that they need to be part of the process. And therefore, it is very, very important for them to be engaged and to get involved in this campaign, because it does not only to their life now and then, but it is also relevant to the socio-economic transformation of their lives, because it affects, for example, their well-being in terms of employment. The climate crisis hits, you have infrastructure damages, you have loss and damage and there, and you lose employment, you lose your livelihood, you lose means of earning an income and supporting your family and yourself. And therefore, it becomes very, very paramount for young people to get involved in this campaign. And we are calling on everyone, everywhere, that the climate justice campaign is not only for ActionAid, but it's for all of us who are concerned about environmental protection and environmental sustainability.
Great. And Rabecca, your last remarks and how you are inviting the youths to jump onto this particular campaign.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, so just like our theme for the campaign says, fund our future. What are we saying? Fund climate solutions and not things that are actually worsening our situation when it comes to the environment. Fund clean energy, fund agriculture. We still have something there that we can do to benefit all of us. Those are actually our lifelines. And looking at the influence that the youth have in driving change, we are saying all those that have initiatives, innovations, you're welcome to be a part of us and just to achieve this, go together, keeping in mind that this is not just for ActionAid alone, but it is for everyone else that is willing to be part.
Any expectations as we wrap this up? Any expectations, Richard?
Thank you very much.
Oh my bad. Oh my God. It's the arrows. Let's go with that one.
No, it's okay. Yeah, indeed. One of our expectations is that We've seen from MTEVs in terms of what government had planned to invest when it comes to environmental protection. But one of the things that we have seen is that there has been increased intensity in the climate impacts. And therefore, expectation is that the budget will reflect the reality that Zambians are going through, that is demanding for investment in agroecology, that is demanding investment in environmental protection, that is demanding investment in disaster risk reduction, that is demanding investment in early warning systems in order for our local farmers, in order for our rural communities and urban communities as well, who are impacted by the climate crisis, to be well informed. We look forward to a budget that will be very responsive enough to address our adaptation measures and building resilience, but also that is going to protect what we've so far built as a country, what we've so far achieved in terms of investment, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of road network, in terms of everything that we've achieved so far. We want to see, and we're hoping to see, that there's been that serious consideration from the government to ensure that environmental protection is at the center and at elm of this budget for 2024.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us this morning, ActionAid. It's been quite educative. I had no idea banks had anything to do with climate. I'm like, are we talking about money?
Well, you're welcome.
Is it the paper money that they're talking about? But it's been very informative. Thank you so much for making time to join us. And if you're just joining us, well, you missed a great conversation. We were chatting with ActionAid on their Fund Our Future campaign, which was also launched on the 26th of September 2023, and also the report How the Finance Flows, which is the banks fueling climate crisis. And this report highlights the main sectors contributing to the climate crisis, especially in the global south, propelled by resources from financial institutions. Well, I've been your host, Lucy Banda, and was joined in studio by Michael Mwansa and Rabecca Mwambazi. Thank you so much for joining us, guys.
Thank you so
Lucy,
much.
and thank you to our listeners.
Great. Well, do stay with us. Do stay tuned to 5FM Radio. This has been the ActionAid Radio program. Have a lovely morning.
89.9. Ladies and gentlemen.